Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I'm really excited about this workshop. And if you want to interrupt me at any time, just unmute and just ask a question. I'm fairly casual about this. I have a lot of material to give you, but I'm going to share this slide deck with everyone when the conference is over. So everybody will have access to this. There are a lot of links in here, like for example, this page that has all this information that I showed you, that links to the Higley article, which is a review article and itself has a ton of other links. So really, really useful to see. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm sharing the wrong. That's my teaser. I don't want to look at my teaser. I want instead to pull up this one. My apologies. All right. Hang on a second. Now I have to reshare that. Share that. Now, how's that? Okay. So, so that's me. That's my contact information. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about drawing fundamentals. I'm just going to give you some tips for how you can help students or people who are visiting your site, and just some ideas for like ways to draw. You get better by drawing. That is how you get better. I can't teach you to draw, but I can give you some tips that will steer you in the right direction and help you to avoid some common missteps. And then a bunch of ideas for nature journaling. We probably won't get through all of them, but what I really want at the end is to hear back from people, like how you might have used drawing already and share with each other ideas and just sort of how you might apply it. I want to show this slide because Santiago Ramon y Cajal is one of my favorite art science people. He was a researcher who is considered the father of modern neuroscience. And up until the time that he did this work, a lot of us didn't understand the brain as a set of structures. It really just sort of seemed like a gray mass, and he stained individual neurons. And what is interesting about his work is that he used drawing as a research tool, as a tool for discovery. And the drawings are also beautiful. So if you're not familiar with his work, I would recommend that you look him up. His work is really stunning. And it's just another piece of evidence how drawing and biology have been connected throughout most of human history, and they've only recently been sort of separated into these sort of left brain, right brain, sort of opposite kinds of pursuits, which they're really not. They're very similar to each other and they're very intertwined. So what we're going to start with is just talking about sort of a frame of mind, and that is that everyone can draw. This is something that, especially in the United States, is true that we don't teach drawing. We don't really value drawing in the upper grades. And there's something that happens in our brains developmentally. Little kids, when they make a drawing, can draw symbolically, like a house might be a box with a triangle on top. And then at a certain point, when they're about 10 or 12, their brains mature to the point where they can actually see shapes and like translate shapes onto the page in, at first really in a rudimentary way, but they learn that is the stage when our brains are able to actually see things in the world and translate them to the page in a way that's more than symbolic. And that's precisely when we stop teaching drawing. So there are a whole lot of us out here who feel like, oh, I'm not talented. Or, oh, I just don't have the skills to draw. Well, it's because you rode a tricycle, and when your body was ready for a bike, nobody gave you a bicycle. And it really is just like riding a bicycle. It's just a set of skills. It feels weird at first. It's embarrassing at first, but over time, if you keep doing it, you'll be like, oh, I think I got the hang of this. And it really is just repetition. So this is something to tell you, but it's also something for you to tell your students and the public and folks that you work with. Drawing is a set of skills. I don't like to think about talent. I like to sort of eliminate this notion and this word from the classroom. I don't like people to show their work and say, well, I'm really embarrassed about this. Like, no, just like this is where you are. This is, this is your experience and it's all valid. And if you keep doing it, you'll get better. That is true for all of us. So I like to sort of steer away from those ideas about talent or genius or things like that. When you're teaching in a formal setting, it's really helpful to start. I mean, this is sort of obvious, but if you're going to ask your students to draw at any point during the semester, it's really helpful to offer them the tools and a little bit of advice towards the beginning of the semester, even if you're not going to use it until later, so that they have the opportunity to practice a little bit. And we get better by doing it. So it's one of those things like speaking French or doing math, that really practicing and exercising is really useful. So starting towards the beginning of the semester is recommended. Ask them to draw a little bit every day, sketch while you're on the subway or sketch at the dinner table, or just sort of like just be constantly drawing a little bit is a way to get better. Okay, so now a little bit about materials. So what kind of paper should you use? Drawing paper, there's a wide range of things that are acceptable, but I would suggest that for this kind of drawing, you want something that's fairly smooth. You want it to be big enough, in other words, like copier size paper. You can use something a little bit smaller, like 5x8. I wouldn't recommend those little tiny sketchbooks unless people have had some experience. So start out fairly large, and you want the paper to have something that's called tooth. And what that is that it is the fibers of the paper have a little bit of texture. This is really just copier paper that I have in my hand right here. So I'm feeling a little bit of texture on it. It's smooth, but it's not completely slick. You don't want it to be slick. You want it to have a little bit of that texture of the fibers of the paper, which is what kind of grabs the graphite. There's a wide range of papers that are appropriate for this. In an art store, sketch paper or drawing paper or a pad or a sketchbook is fine. And if you're using it in a notebook, then spiral bound is preferable, because then you can flatten it out. Bound books, there are bound books that flatten out, but they're super expensive. They're really nice, but you want a book that's really going to flatten out all the way so that you can use, both pages, or also it just is less cumbersome. Printer paper, copier paper, the back of an envelope, that's all fine. So if you have a limited budget, don't fuss about this. Pencils are, drawing pencils are rated by B and H. So this one right here, I don't know, it's maybe backwards to you, but this one is a 2B pencil, and it's going to make marks that are sort of like fairly, medium dark. If you want to kind of supplement that, then you might supplement it with something that's called a 6B. So pencils that are, I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so pencils are rated by softness and hardness. And so B is soft for some reason. It's probably some German word. And then it keeps going. As the numbers get higher, the lead is softer and softer and makes darker and darker marks. So this is what a 6B. So this was my 2B, and that's my 6B. So it's much, much darker. And then H pencils are hard, and they are much, much lighter. So I'm not sure if you're even going to be able to see that, but that's like if you're doing something like dandelion, thistle, or hairs, or just little light marks. It's a pencil that if you use it, it can bear down and sort of like go through the paper. So it's for very, very light work. So if you just have a limited budget, number 2 pencil is just fine. Don't fuss about the pencils. This is a kneaded eraser. It comes in a little package that looks like chewing gum or something. And you can stretch it to clean it, kind of like silly putty. And it also has some properties. I'm going to try to play this little video right here. So I'm going to stop my share for a second. I'm going to go here and pull up this video and pause it, and then I'm going to try to share the YouTube. I think that's it. Can y'all see as if demo needed eraser? Okay. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear the sound, but I'm going to go ahead and play it and we'll see what happens. I'm using the kneaded eraser, forming it into a very thin wedge, so I can use the edge of it to draw a light line in the darker graphite, removing it in the line shape. It's slightly sticky, so I can use it to pick up small areas of graphite. Okay, I don't know. Were y'all able to hear what I was saying? Oh, awesome. Yay, technology. Okay, so that was a kneaded eraser. And then now I'm going to reshare. I'm only going to do this once or twice, so this chaos won't continue for too much longer. Okay. So that's tool number 3. The first was paper, second was pencils, this was kneaded eraser, and now this one is, oh, I wrote kneaded eraser, but what it is something called a tortillon or a paper blender or a stump. And it's just a piece, it's like very, very pressed paper, and it comes in several different sizes. And I'm going to stop share and then share the quick little video. Let's see. I've lost my, hang on a second. I just lost all my, where did it go? Okay. 30-second demo here. And I'm going to pause it and share that. So you should see something that says paper blender. Okay. Now I'm going to play this little demo real fast. After you put some graphite onto the paper with a pencil, you can use a paper blender to soften the edges and smear it around and make the transitions less stark between black and white. Here I'm adding more graphite to this berry, and then I'll come back in with a paper blender and soften the edges and blend it out to get a range of grays. Okay, now I'm going to stop share, go back to my original. All right, are we back? Should say drawing fundamentals. Woohoo! All right, so that's what the blender is for. And another neat thing with the blender is that you can actually, let's say you've got a 6B pencil, you can smear a bunch of 6B and like put your pencil on it, and then you can use that blender to draw. So that's for something like, you know, a flower petal or a dragonfly wing or something that's really light or translucent and you don't want lines. You can actually draw with the blender itself. This thing is, I love these two tools are things that are like fundamental in any drawing studio. But I think like for people who don't draw and don't know about them, they're transformative. They're just great tools, and they're, you know, a couple dollars a piece to put into a student kit. So really handy. Having a pencil sharpener is really great. These things also, you know, cost like a couple dollars. And if you keep your pencil sharp, it's just like finding the right word. If you keep your pencil sharp, then you can make the line really specific. And like if it's changing a lot and has lots of little, let's say a serrated edge of a leaf or something, you're going to be able to see it a lot better if your pencil is sharp. So it sounds like something really trivial, but having a sharp pencil is really a good thing to have. and I keep it in a Ziploc bag. I happen to have these little nature journals that I take with me, but I wouldn't recommend starting students out with these little journals until they get some experience. But having a little Ziploc bag to keep it together is really great. Okay, so this is really fun. When I start a class with students drawing, and this is something that, you know, if you have, let's say you're teaching a semester of intro biology, or maybe it's intro conservation biology or something. Um, if you just take one day, one of your 45 minutes or one of your 50-minute classroom sessions, or maybe you have 2 hours, which is wonderful, and just spend one day on these drawing exercises at the beginning, you will really help students out a lot. On the very first day, at the first beginning of the class, I will choose some organic forms. I go around to my drawing classes with a bag, with a box of bones. And what I use these bones for is to set them out in front of students and have them just look at them. It's not something like a leaf has a kind of leaf shape. And so people may not see the shape exactly because they have in their mind what a leaf is supposed to look like, whereas a bone is just sort of a bunch of shapes. And it's also monochromatic. So I will ask them, and I also often do this with leaves. I don't do this with bones all the time. I will do this with leaves or sticks or things like that, any kind of natural object. So I start by, and you don't want anything too complicated. You don't want a sunflower with a zillion seeds on the inside, or a pine cone that's super complicated. There's a lot of nifty Fibonacci kind of geometry that's going on with things in clusters that's really fun, but it's just too complicated to give students right off the bat. So I'll start off with something like this setting on the right, where I have like some very simple organic forms, bones or shells or something like that, that I offer to them to look at. And I ask them first to start by looking, and they just have them like look at it. And you want to make sure to ask them to like look at it, but then put it down in one place and be looking at it from one angle, because you're going to want to ask them to draw it. And if you have them look at it from all these different angles, it's going to be confusing. So say, look at it for a second, and then put it down, and you know, that's your angle, and just stare at it for a minute. And then I say, you know, put it under your chair and draw it from memory. And they all go, oh no. And so I start out by scaring everybody to death. And then they draw it for 3 minutes. And then the third thing, we bring it back out and we compare, and we talk about like, well, what did you see when you brought it back out that you missed? Or what are you excited that you got right? Well, I drew 3 lobes, and there are exactly 3 lobes on there. And I got this distance right, and I was really surprised that it looked right. Or I just like, oh my gosh, this was way more jaggedy here than I meant it to be. I like to stop here and let everyone know that these 3 stages, looking, drawing, editing, are what's going on in our minds when we draw. And what happens so often with new students is that we rush through the looking part and we jump into the drawing part, and then we go straight to the editing part. So we spend most of our time criticizing ourselves, and most of our time saying, oh my God, I just can't draw. This sucks. And instead of like really, really spending time looking, because it's the looking part that's going to help make the other 2 parts better. So taking these 3 things apart and telling students that like, this is what's happening when you're drawing: looking, drawing, and then editing, then going back and looking, drawing, editing, revising, looking, drawing, editing. Make sure that you spend some time in that looking part. The point of all of this is getting them to look, really. Like, the point is not to generate beautiful drawings like Jennifer Landon's article, although that's wonderful if you can get them to that point. It takes years. The point is to get their observation skills going, and to get them to ask questions about structure and function, to get them to think about what they're seeing. The primary goal is their observation. The secondary goal is what's the drawing that they're making. So 3 warm-ups that we do at the beginning, and I like to do this as a warm-up, but also to remind students if they're stuck anywhere in any drawing during the middle of the semester to go back to this, like, oh, why don't you try blind contour drawing, get your brain back in that looking mode again. So they're not just warm-ups, they're for kind of getting unstuck. So the first one you already know, we did a blind contour exercise, reminding them to draw slowly and to look only at the paper and to make your hand be like a tiny ant crawling along the edge. And it's always, I love this moment in the class because it didn't really happen by Zoom, but it, did somebody raise their hand? There's a hand on me. I'm not sure why there's a hand on me. Maybe I accidentally raised my hand. So at this stage, there's always so much levity. At the end of this little exercise, people are laughing. And it's a great way to loosen everybody up and just say, look, this is just, we're all just trying to look. So blind contour, negative space is another exercise. So with a negative space exercise, what you're drawing is, you're drawing the shapes of the space where the thing is not. So, okay, here's a good space, like right here, this sort of yellowish space that is taken up by the place in between where the leaves are. So this is really great to go outside and look at a tree or some twigs, bring some twigs into a classroom and just look at, like, what are the spaces made by not the solid objects, but the air around them. It's kind of a hard concept for people. This is super helpful when drawing through a microscope because you can also use the edge of the scope as it, whether it's circular or square, you know, if you're on a video screen, it's going to be square, to look at the shape of that space around the object. It's really helpful to get, it's just another way of looking to help you get in looking mode. The third is gesture drawing. So gesture drawing is what you probably think of as quick sketches, really. They're just, you know, ask your students to draw 3 30-second sketches of whatever it is. And it's really super fast. And you're just going to get the overall vibe of a thing. You're going to get, like, not going to get any details. You're just going to get some quick sketches. It's super useful when you're in the field and you're working with animals and looking at animal behavior, being able to make really fast kind of gestural drawings of, like, this wasp's long legs hanging down behind and sort of dangling, or these wings that are flapping, just sort of really quick gestures. So blind contour, negative space, and gesture drawing, really good warm-ups, about 3 minutes each. So I have students do those at the beginning. And then we get into, like, let's sort of settle in a little bit and take a subject and try to get, you know, fit some things together like a puzzle and see if we can make a drawing. And these 3 tools come in really handy: relationships and measuring, and proportion and foreshortening, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and finding shapes, geometric shapes and other shapes. So for relationships, one thing that really works is using one part to measure the whole. So this is a jawbone that was, when I was drawing it, sort of flat on the table. So this one was really simple. And I just used one tooth to measure, like, okay, I'm just arbitrarily choosing that tooth as a measuring tool. And I'm saying that the width of the jawbone is roughly equivalent to that tooth. And the length of the jawbone is maybe 3 of those teeth, or maybe 3.5, before it hits that bump where it turns a corner and goes flat. And, you know, you sort of like use that as a measuring device. And this is also really handy when you're drawing through a microscope, because you can't get in there and, like, really measure things. I mean, you can if you have, like, a little reticle, or if you have, like, little millimeter measure or something like that, but it's really handy to use the object itself as a device for measuring the rest of it. Now here's where it gets tricky. There's something called foreshortening, which is basically, I'm not sure if this is going to work on the camera, but if you're looking at something that is facing you, this leaf right here, if I looked at it flat it would have a certain distance across that mid vein. But if I point it at you, it's really a different shape and it's much shorter. So how do you handle that? You're not actually going to measure, you're not going to take out your ruler and measure the length of the leaf. You're going to measure what does that leaf look like against your vision. So I know this is a little hard to do with Zoom, but just as an example, I'm going to admit this person who just came in. So this is a demonstration of Dürer, of drawing. So if you imagine, we're not measuring this woman's length of her leg. He's looking at the shapes that her leg makes against that grid. And I brought a drawing grid here just as a demonstration. So this is a handy thing to use, but it's not necessary really. I always have just one so that I can kind of help demonstrate this concept. So if I'm doing something with this flower, then, and I'm drawing, instead of measuring the length of the leaf, I'm gonna pick the place where it's closest to me, and I'm going to make an imaginary pane of glass right there. And I'm making all of my measurements against that pane of glass as if I had, you know, a drawing grid up here. And so what I'm doing is I'm measuring the shapes that I see from that plane, that flat plane. This is a concept that's really hard for younger students. It's hard for adults, honestly, but it's something that you can definitely do with high school and undergraduate students with practice. I think it really helps to actually have one drawing grid around, even if you're not asking them to use the drawing grid, so that you can establish like what that means when you say you have a pane of glass. And I pick the place that's closest to me, because if I pick something back here, it's going to throw this off. So I just say, I'm just going to make a pane of glass right here. And that's where I'm going to make all of my measurements, either with, you know, a ruler on that pane of glass or with my fingers or some kind of measurement. So does anybody have any questions about that? I know that's a little confusing. So this is another demonstration of what that might look like. You want to pick a position for yourself and not change. This is something that throws people off. Like if you're doing some really kind of careful scientific illustration, you really want to like remember exactly where your head is and where the object is and where, you know, what your position is. Because even if you just do this, you're throwing yourself off a little bit. So just kind of settle in a little bit. So that's proportion and foreshortening. So another one is finding shapes. And this is something that, you know, you just sort of like are looking for just basic shapes. And so like here on this lily, what I'm seeing is kind of like generally a, see if I can lower it. You know, it's kind of generally a funnel, but it curves outward. So like you would create some kind of like, shape that opens up like that. It's a open funnel. Other shapes like leaves can be sort of a plane or a curved plane or something. So just sort of how you describe the shapes really generally. So here's another example of a slime mold that I did, where if we break it down to shapes, we're looking at like a lozenge with sort of a dip in it. We're looking at some ovals and some kind of twisted stems or twisted sticks. Here's another example. We could break this down into sort of a cylinder for the body of the Nepenthes, and then kind of a triangle for that first part of the hood, and the figure 8 is that kind of like part that's sticking over, and a sort of J-shape stem, and then this curved plane of the remainder of the leaf. And then you kind of use your other tools of like really close looking and using negative space and just sort of trying to fit things together to kind of make those shapes a little more specific and make them a little bit try to refine them, in other words. And it's just that's the process. It's just trying to get closer and closer to what you see. Um, so that's just sort of some drawing fundamentals. And then we get to light on form. So how shading works. This is really fun to do because I find that it takes some of the pressure off from, like the hardest thing is teaching all the getting a drawing right and getting the pieces to fit together, and it causes some frustration. And so giving students a little break. When I teach shading, I always bring around this carton of eggs, and I put an egg on the table here, there, and different places, and I have a light source coming from one side. So doing it near a window or having a light source is really handy because you can see that if you just have flat light from the fluorescent lights, it doesn't really help you see the shading on it. But right now I have like a light source coming from over here and it's in shadow over here. So the reason I use an egg is that, yeah, it's an organic form, but it has no like, it doesn't have a lot of innies and outies, and it's not complicated. And it's just like, if you get the egg wrong, it's no big deal. Just like basically draw a basic egg, like get an egg onto the paper. And then this is not something that I'm talking about much in the rest of this workshop, but then I have them translate that to ink. So you start with the, graphite drawing, and then you translate it to hatching, and then to cross hatching or contoured hatching, and then to stippling. So that the simplicity of the egg is really helpful for that. So when you're asking them to do the shading, if you're getting into an actual drawing and not just doing something really simple, what you're looking for are areas of light and dark. So you try to identify with what you're looking at, what's the brightest spot, and you're looking at something in color. So sometimes it's really hard to identify that. Is there a shiny place where the light is a highlight from the sun or from a light? What's the darkest part? Like, where are the deepest shadows? And then what are all the in-between grays? And so trying to look at like, what are all the different values? The art term for this is value. So light and dark, or tone. So what are all the different values of gray that you can find in between the darkest and the lightest? For scientific illustration, this is just a little fun fact. For scientific illustration, the light source comes from the upper left. So if you're having students do more formal scientific illustration, you basically float it on a white background, and you have the light from the upper left. And if it's a plant, you do not include like the vase. You don't include, and this is not a plant. This is like an ash tree and daylilies. They're not attached to each other, so that's not botanically relevant. But you would not in a botanical drawing include the jar. That's a no-no for scientific illustration. And there are conventions about scientific illustration. This is way beyond what we need to do in this class, in this workshop, but a great resource for scientific illustration, if you want to get into that, is the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, GNSI, puts out this handbook called the Guild Handbook for Scientific Illustration. And it's expensive, but you can find used versions out there that are really, really helpful. It has chapters on using ink, chapters on color pencil, chapters on different kinds of organisms, like how you illustrate insects, and like some orders of insects you do, like this with their, center. They're symmetrical, and some insects you do sideways, like all the orthopterans, grasshoppers, and crickets you do sideways. And like there are all these conventions that how to do fish, how to do extinct vertebrates. So it's a nifty book. All right, so that's that. So putting all this together, and how are we doing on time? So the important thing to always come back to is, how does this relate to students' biology learning or conservation learning? And I think that what my approach is always to kind of think of it as toggling. So drawing is important, but also like what are they learning from the drawing? Like what are their observations while you're drawing, whether it's 10 minutes drawing outside doing nature journaling or whether it's an entire semester doing botanical illustration, what were you getting out of it? What were you noticing about relationships between structure and function, or what were you noticing about the environment if you were drawing in the field? And so like using writing as a tool, drawing and then writing about it, drawing and then writing about it. It's kind of like in your brain, it's going back to different parts of your brain and it's experiencing the natural world in different ways. And I feel like the strength of this is not the drawing itself, it's the drawing plus the other conceptual learning and the conceptualizing and verbalizing about it and collecting data. So you might ask students to like make companion notes for their drawings or like label things, or like have like one page which with a drawing, the other page is like things they observed, or have them discuss afterwards. So there are other ways to kind of like bring that all in together. Um, so this has just been a lot of me talking for the last half hour, and I'm going to do a whole section on nature journaling, but I want to stop sharing just for a second to see if anybody has questions, observations, things they want to share, before I head on to the rest of it. Oh, and thank you for putting the Guild handbook in there. That's great. Look for it used. Oh my God, it's very expensive. Okay, so I'll go back to, yeah, Marjorie.
Yeah, Nancy, I had just a connection from the drawing grid that looked really like what I would call a quadrat that I would take out into the field and
Exactly.
use to estimate percent covers. And I wonder if using it in a lab or using it to make drawings as well would help students improve in their ability to kind of flatten what they see and
Using a quadrat is a great
do their
idea. I
field
never
work.
thought about that. That it's like, yeah, that's exactly what this is. That's a really, really neat idea. Another thing I do, and I talk about this in a minute with nature journaling, is I keep these
Oh,
frames. And
cool.
so these are basically just cut out of, brown paper bag. But I also used to keep like, I don't know, I'm sure some people in here are old enough to remember slides from slide projectors. And they had these white sort of frames. Like if you have those around, but you can also just cut them. And I will ask students like place this on the ground or place it on some bark or place it somewhere, outside and just draw what's in the square. And, so it's a tiny quadrat is what it is. But yeah, that's such a great idea. I'm going to use that next time of relating it to a quadrat. Okay, so let me go back to sharing my presentation. All right. Can everybody see nature journaling? Okay. So these are just some ideas to throw out as ways, alternative ways to think about nature journals. We've all probably used them for, teaching and various things. I think I don't need to be telling this to this group of people, but it's really helpful for nature journals to have a little label in them of some kind, to ask your students to keep at least the date and the location, and then something, other notes. It might include the weather or other kinds of observations, but it's so common for people to, including myself, to like make a great nature journal observation and forget to write down the date and the location, including things like, such and such creek, or, at such and such mountain or something. So one quick thing for a nature journal is super easy is to make gesture drawings, which are just basically really quick sketches, just to get an overall vibe of a place and kind of some general shapes. This really loosens people up. By the way, doing a gesture drawing is a way to kind of like just throw something onto the page and just get sort of a few little details. So you can have somebody do this in like 5 minutes. It's a good 5-minute exercise. They're also, as I mentioned before, really good for capturing animal movement and animal behavior. And So gesture drawings are super sketchy, and there's no judgment around like, well, it's not very detailed, it's not meant to be really detailed. I think this group also probably is familiar with the common prompt of I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So that's a great thing to ask students to write. If you draw, on the other page, you might write something that you notice that you wonder, what does it remind you of? Because that leads into other wider conversations about, ecological relationships and symbiosis and behavior and other kinds of concepts. Um, 10 by 10 by 10, similar to those frames. I have students sit for 10 minutes and write draw something that's a small area that's basically, 10 centimeters. And the size of the palm of your hand is what I tell people. Draw something the size of the palm of your hand and then write 10 observations that you made. So 10 minutes, something really small, and make 10 observations about it is a way to get people kind of a little bit more in that mindfulness sort of place of being present and really paying closer attention. Whereas a gesture drawing is super quick. This is a way to get people a little bit more focused. One of my favorite stories about doing this exercise was I took some students. I lived in Atlanta for a while. I'm from Atlanta. And I was taking some students from Spelman College to Okefenokee Swamp, and a lot of them had never really spent time in the wilderness or in a canoe. And some of these students are affluent, but they had been mostly in urban environments and really had not spent a lot of time in the wilderness. And one of the students wrote in her journal, like, nature is so peaceful, because that's kind of like, I think, maybe a common thing that we think about nature before we really spend time in nature. And she crossed it out and wrote, nature is loud. Something just jumped into the pond and ate something else. And I just thought, if she hadn't been sitting there and writing this and really listening, she would have missed that detail. So it's a really great way to get people, really listening and paying attention to a place, smelling it, feeling the temperature of the soil and the air. 10 minutes, 10 centimeters, 10 observations. Artifacts of attention, I won't go into, we just did it. So that's a really good one for getting students to really focus on sort of paying attention in the place where you are. Sound is a really interesting thing to try to capture in a nature journal. And this is an example of something that's like a sonogram from, if you have Merlin or any of those kind of apps where you see like the sonograms of birds, you've seen these before. And basically it's really an XY axis. So the y-axis is frequency, the height of the sound, like low being down here and high being up here, and then the x-axis is time. And it's another way of expressing this. Well, this is a musical map, which is, so that's just basically to say x-y-axis. I want to show this is also very similar to a musical like musical notation works in the same way. It's also an XY axis of a kind where you have the high notes like somewhere, so you can see the low and the high and they're going in a particular direction. And so capturing sound on a kind of XY axis in a nature journal, you can use a musical staff, and just like print these out. These are available widely on the internet, and you can print it out on a page. And like this is one where I went to a park in Cambridge, and it was a cemetery, and I was listening to traffic noise in the background, and then I've got like these high chipmunk sounds, and I'm like they're middle sounds and high sounds, and I'm sort of like writing down all the different sounds I'm hearing over the course of about a minute. So that's one way of capturing sound. And then I'm going to kind of go backwards here to show you another way to capture sound. So another way of capturing sound is thinking of it like a map, like a sound map with yourself at the center. And you might create symbols to represent certain kinds of sounds, like a rumbling sound or a tick tick sound or a chipping sound. And you might create this little sort of like visual key for what the sounds are and then place them in the environment, in relationship to you. So here's another example. So you're at the center of this and the sounds are moving away from that, from you at the center. And you can see this person had a little key for like, and they're naming chickadee or sandhill cranes, but you might even ask students or, your participants to just write down chirping sound or warbly sound. You don't want to like place any kind of expectation on naming species, but like how would you describe that sound? It's like sometimes red-winged blackbirds sound to me like water going through a straw, sort of a warbly, water bubbling sound or something like that. So you might have them just describe the kind of sound and use this to make a map. Okay, so that's a couple different ways of capturing sound. This is just another example of that XY axis, a sonogram where you're seeing like cheer, 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 like going across. Okay, so smell is another thing that's really hard to capture, but there are ways to do it, I think, with language that's maybe a metaphor. Usually when we talk about smells, we use metaphor a lot. We say lemony or sweet or flowery, like a flower, or funky or musky, like musk, or yeasty, like yeast, or those kinds of words. So what are some words that you can use to describe smells that you're noticing? This is just a link to an interesting art science project that happened at a field station called Smelling Committee, and you can follow that link. There's some neat stuff about that. You can use, again, similar to the sound map, you can make a key and describe certain kinds of smells and place them on a map, or this one is from a wonderful project called Dear Data, where these two artists wrote to each other, one in New York and one in, I think, Italy or somewhere in Europe, London maybe, and they were sending back and forth data every week about things they smelled or things that their laundry or what they were thinking about, and they made like graphs of all kinds to represent things they noticed in their lives. So this is a really neat link to follow up on. Oh, this is so fun. So you can take a pen and hang it from, you can construct like a tripod and just use the wind and put some kind of flange on the pen, and like use like a felt tip pen and have the flange just sort of like catch the wind and move the pen around. You have to mess around a little bit with like getting it the right height, and like how does that flange, you don't want it to be too spinny. So messing around with that. You can also attach it to the end of a twig on a tree and sort of let the movement of the tree be guiding the pen. And it really makes these beautiful poetic drawings of, these are organic forms that are produced by the wind and by trees. And so there's one example of the flange that this artist has used, and some links that you can follow to see how these folks did it. This is one where this circular one was hung directly from a tripod and just like was blowing around, and it looks like the wind was really strongly blowing towards the lower left on that particular day. You've seen this also when you go outside at the beach and you see like grass that's kind of carving a little circle. So there are lots of different ways that you can think of to sort of draw, where you're not actually drawing a thing, you're using drawing to record the movement of wind. Similarly, I used a pen to follow the movement of ants. This was in the tropics, so ants are all over the place on the ground in Costa Rica. And I just put it down and like was following every ant with my pen. So I drew their paths. There are probably lots of other ways that you can think of to use drawing where you're not drawing an organism, but you're using drawing to track something or trace the path of something. So it's just another way I think about drawing. A memory map is a really neat thing to do, to think about like students who have a relationship with a place, or like if you've just come back from the field, or if you want to start, it's a great way to start a conversation. It's a great icebreaker. Like draw a memory map of a place where you were at water, like a creek or a beach or a lake or something, some memory from your past or something, and just have people draw a memory map of like little details. Like this is a map of my conservation land across the street, but it's not to scale and it's not really a map. It's just like these are places that I sort of have names for them myself, you know, like Chestnut Ridge is like a place where there's some American chestnut growing that I think is really exciting. And there's like a little a big eastern pine that I call King Philip. And like they're just, these are my own little names for things. So it's my relationship with this place. So this is a really interesting exercise when you're sort of trying to get at not just um, a scientific approach to the landscape, but like an emotional relationship with the land. So I find this to be kind of a nice little exercise for getting at that. Um, so a palimpsest is a kind of, there was a time when paper was really um, a, a resource that we didn't have a lot of. And so people would take something and write sideways on somebody's old, you know, list of how many sheep, and then they would write a love note sideways on it or vice versa. And so this is sort of taken from a palimpsest to write a letter to someone who was in the, like I made a map where the first layer is a map and the next layer is a letter to someone who was here 500 years ago, someone who was here 50 years ago, and someone who will be here in the future. You might also do it where you're literally writing on the same thing. I'm looking at the time. There's something like, I don't know, 14 of these or something. You're going to have access to this slide deck at the end of the meeting. And so I won't go through all the rest of them. They're just a bunch, and there's a bunch of links at the end that have like books, and I think the John Muir Laws link is on there, and just all kinds of stuff, and my contact information. And so help yourself to all of that. But I really want to have a conversation with folks, and I'm sorry I didn't leave more time for that. I just now noticed the time. So I want to hear from you how you've used drawing or nature journaling in your situation, and what ideas this might have given you, and you know, share with each other. So, and you can use your actual hand if you have your camera on, or you can use the little electronic Zoom hand if you want to raise your hand that way. If anybody has any comments. I don't see anybody. Okay, Marjorie.
Oh my gosh, I love all these. This is so much fun, Nancy, to see all these sort of different ways of approaching making field observations. And I just wanted to sort of reflect that I send students out a lot to make observations and then come back with 10 questions. And those questions are then the starting point for the discussion
Yeah.
that follows. But I don't give them as prompts that are as directed as these generally for how to make their observations. I tell them to just use whatever combination of words and sketches works for them. But I
Mm-hmm.
really like the idea of taking some of these and making them the specific starting point to get them a little bit out of their comfort zones for some of them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think these are going to be really rich for developing into that.
Yeah, and it also kind of depends on what your goals are, you know, because if your goals are really to try to get them to think about, um, you know, more the scientific question about like evolutionary relationships, then you might be asking them to draw an organism and to think about 10 characteristics of that organism and talk about structure function or something. But if your goal is to have a conversation that's more philosophical or sort of like that thinking about values or emotional or our kind of like relationship with the land, you might do a memory map or something like that. So they have different goals and they're just tools for different purposes.
Hmm. I could see a memory mapping a really fun way also to capture the experience of having done a research project, and
Yeah.
where you spent time in the field or in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a really beautiful way to capture that in a way that they would not be accustomed to.
Yeah. So I am going to share this, I guess, with Bernie and with Martha, and like they'll send links out to you, I think. So everybody will have access to the materials on here. So
That's
um,
amazing. What a wealth of resources.
yeah, and there's a lot of really great books and links and stuff to follow up on that are just super useful. And another thing that I think I have some links on here. Um, are some of the papers that are useful for like when you're talking to your department head, for example, or if you're in a nonprofit and you're talking to your board or something and you're trying to justify why you need drawing materials or why you want to do drawing as part of your, these, there's a lot of peer-reviewed research that backs up why drawing is a really useful tool to use in the classroom so that you're not just saying it like we want to do this fun exercise like no, it's actually really useful. There's a growing body of data about it, so
And that is super helpful because in we sort of informally rely on drawings and observations a lot, but we often don't kind of take it one step further, to become a little more formal or to develop their skills a little bit more. We just sort of let them do
yeah.
what they can handle. But these are great tips for helping them elevate their skill set.
Yeah. And let's see, Barbara wrote, my lab manual for marine bio includes quite a bit of drawing from microscopy or dissections, but I never really thought about how cool this is for developing observational skills and questions. Amanda wrote, I'm excited to see how we can apply some of these activities to programming here at Woodland Park Zoo. We do daily informal programming, so I think some of these activities would be great for encouraging mindfulness, science, identity. Yeah. So great. Well, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, my email is sciencecandance@gmail.com, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And I also do faculty professional development workshops if I can do it by Zoom, for folks wherever you are. So that's another thing that's available. I guess so. I don't know how we go back
Well,
to.
Nancy, let me just say thank you so much for
Oh, thank
this
you for inviting
fantastic
me. It's really
session.
fun.
This was, yeah, I feel like I have so many ideas to take home with me, and it's great to know that there's also going to be the evidence to back it all up. So,
Yeah.
um, please join me, people, in thanking Nancy for this great session. Then I think if you just go down to the bottom right, where it says "Leave the
Oh,
room,"
leave
the
room.
breakout
Okay,
room, that'll take you back to
great.
the main
Okay.
session.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll see you all there. Thank you.